right, in Arkansas, the primary season is behind us and the general election lies ahead. Still unknown what measures may make the ballot this year. And another unknown, is the federal health care law unconstitutional? It's time to talk politics. Joining me for our roundtable is Max Brantley. He is the liberal lion leading the popular Arkansas Times blog. Also with us is Clint Reed, Republican strategist with Impact Management Group. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for being with us today.
You bet. Thanks.
Let's begin with the U.S. Supreme Court. We are expecting a ruling probably by the end of this month, maybe as soon as next week, in terms of the individual mandate, the provision of the federal health care law that would force everybody to buy insurance at a certain level. They could, the Supreme Court could strike down that provision. The Supreme Court could uphold that provision. They could strike the whole thing down as unconstitutional. Clint, I start with you. Will the Supreme Court ruling end the health care debate?
Absolutely not. I think no matter the outcome, no matter what they rule on, I think it's going to have political ramifications all across the country, certainly in the state of Arkansas. As you look at the popularity of Barack Obama and how that might impact legislative races, which might impact control of the House and the Senate, but by no means is it over. It's far from over.
Max, agree, disagree? Does it end the debate?
No. Health care is going to be debated until everybody has it, and that's ultimately the issue. I think the Supreme Court will make a political decision and knock down at least part, if not all, of the law. The unfortunate thing for those who think health care reform was a good thing is that the real political fallout, that is the millions of people that will lose benefits gained under this law, won't really become apparent until after the November election. And then the sea might change on where people's feelings are on it.
Let's talk about something that the Arkansas Supreme Court laid down this week. On Friday, a ruling came out that struck down the state's execution law, basically declared it unconstitutional. Is this a technical change that needs to be made to correct this provision, or do you think that we reopen the debate over the death penalty in Arkansas?
Well, it is a technical change. That the legislature gave entirely too much power to the state correction department in deciding how to do executions. They're going to have to rewrite the law. This will be an opportunity for opponents of death penalty to come in and say, let's think about it. Let's look at what other states have done. Let's look at the number of innocent people who've been executed. Let's look at the unfairness of how it's applied. Let's look at the cost. And let's talk about doing away with capital punishment. In Arkansas, not going to happen, however. But they'll be taught.
I think it is a technical issue. I do think that what we're looking at in this decision, and I think it has broader implications. The federal government continues to encroach upon the lives of individuals all across this country. And I think that voters in this state, obviously voters around the country as we go into the November election, can make this decision too. But is the judiciary, staying within its bounds? In this particular case, I do think it is a technical issue. But at what point do voters take a broader stance and say, you know what, this is the federal government.
Can I butt in and say these guys are trained, aren't they? You turn everything into the evil old devil federal government. This is really an Arkansas constitutional issue. It's a overstepping of powers. It's a delegation of duties to the legislature. I mean, this isn't an evil judge's issue here.
Don't disagree with that. And on the technical issue, Max is right. I do think as voters go to the polls and you're looking at a national presidential election, it's the encroachment of the federal government. At what point do voters make that distinction between a technical issue and a values issue? I just don't think they're going to make that.
Yeah. And we had Justice Robert Brown on our show last week talking about some judicial election reforms, as a matter of fact. Do you think that we have too many activist judicial decisions in the state of Arkansas?
Oh, no, not at all. I think our judges have been remarkably restrained. They have made a couple of decisions that are flashpoint on some moral issues. Certainly, they've been outspoken on some gay rights issues. But in terms of business, they've been pretty friendly to the business community. There's the occasional outlier on punitive damages, for example, which is high on the list of the corporate community to change. But this isn't a runaway freight train Supreme Court. And Arkansas juries are not runaway juries. But forget about interpreting law, and let's look at the facts. The verdicts awarded in Arkansas against national standards are small. There's just not a ton of money being thrown away on frivolous lawsuits here.
If you look at the 2003 tort reform legislation that was passed, ultimately I believe a majority of it has been upheld. A lot of it has been stricken by the state Supreme Court, and a lot of it has been done by administrative rulemaking. I think that's going to be a key debate once we get past this election cycle, is where do we go in 2014? And I think the judiciary in Arkansas is going to have I don't want to say a mark on it, but I think there are going to be a lot of people looking at how they can reform that.
Well, the corporate community is not going to be happy until a sick or injured man cannot get any money for his injuries. I mean, that will be a perfect judicial system of the corporate community. We do have a great new report out of Texas this week that showed the toughest tort reform law in the country has produced no benefits and reduction of health care costs.
Yeah, it is coming on the horizon. You do have a lot of judicial turnover coming, particularly at the high court level.
It'll change.
And do you see a lot of influence of money, a lot of business community activism in future judicial elections, Clint?
I don't necessarily think that it's, we should look at it as Max likes to portray it as the corporate world versus
of course we should.
As the judicial world. I do think that a lot of people, rightfully so, should look at how the judiciary is acting. It should strictly interpret the Constitution, and I think there are a lot of people, not just the corporate world or the business world, that don't agree with that and don't think that that's happening.
Well, of course, the last tort reform decision that the corporate community hated was because the legislation, in spite of evidence and testimony from every noted lawyer, adopted rules that flew straight in the face of the Constitution. It's precisely a lack of respect for the Constitution that has gotten them in trouble.
Let's come back and do the cage match on judicial elections
in
a couple of weeks here.
That'd be fun.
Let's talk about what's coming in 2012. In 2012 with our state legislative races. In 2010, we saw this Republican tsunami really sweep a lot of Republicans into office. This was in the Arkansas Times this week. Dr. Jay Barth wrote about this, said that there's basically a gentle breeze blowing in the GOP's direction. Do you agree that it's a gentle breeze?
Jay's a smart guy. He writes for us, and he's a good Democratic liberal like I am. And I think there is an element of wishful thinking there in what he's written. I think the key issue in 2012 is, well, we know the continued dislike of Barack Obama continues in Arkansas. The question is does it translate down the ballot in virtually every race as it did in 2010? I would like to think candidates and issues matter, and people in local legislative races will make decisions on who'd be best in the legislature for them, not who's sitting in Washington. I think Clint will tell you that those generic polling numbers that they find make them happy and sleep well every night.
Gentle breeze?
2 points.
Big breeze.
2 points. One, it's a hurricane, and a good friend of mine told me this morning, he said, what makes a hurricane so powerful is that there are sustained winds. And I think what we're starting to see is that there are sustained winds that are coming based on a couple issues. One, jobs in the economy. If you look at the economy all across the country, not just in Arkansas, we're seeing unemployment rates continue to be at all-time highs. Number two, health care. Number two issue in the 2010 elections, legislative elections, was health care. For the most part of 2011, it was education as the number two issue. We've now seen health care come back to the forefront. This decision comes down Monday, Tuesday next week. No matter what the decision is, health care is going to be the number two issue. That's not a winner for Barack Obama. It's certainly not a winner for Democrats.
But you have to admit there's some irony in this. Jobs. We know we're suffering in great measure because of ill-conceived tax policies of George Bush and ill-conceived spending by George Bush. I understand he's not the president anymore, but he has a big responsibility. But we're going to make Barack Obama pay. Barack Obama tried to give more people health care, something that everybody seems to want, and we're going to cheer people losing health care. I think the paradox is
But Max,
crazy.
not to use my words, but to use Barack Obama and Bill Clinton's words, give us 2 years, give us 4 years. If we don't fix it, vote us out. They haven't fixed it. It's time to go.
Well, the Republican filibuster in the Senate has made it, the fact that you have to have 61 votes to pass anything in the Senate anything, even to discuss a matter, has totally changed the ground in Washington.
I think Republicans would just like to see the president put forward a budget. It's been hundreds of days before he's put forward a budget. Those are the sorts of policies.
These guys, they got a machine up in Washington, and they just roll this stuff out of it.
You guys are making it easy for me to do my job this week. It just really kind of winds you guys up and turn you loose, though. Let's talk a little bit about what's happened in some recent primary elections in Arkansas. We saw on the Republican and on the Democratic side, to an extent, the more extreme candidates, the more conservative, and some of the more liberal candidates. Well, Joyce Elliott over Fred Allen, for instance, is a Democratic example.
Yeah, but that was the only one that got it, and that had nothing to do with it. Joyce Elliott didn't win on the Democratic side because of ideology. I mean, that's an outlier. But I think on the Republican side, there was a pretty clear pattern. More conservative candidates won in race after race, in which really the battle was, I'm more conservative than you are.
Well, here's my question, though, is what is the legislature going to look like in terms of willingness to compromise when we have got some of these etched in stone positions come 2013?
Yeah, I think if you look at Republican politics, several years ago you used to be able to just be able to say, look, I'm pro-life, and that used to be what would make you the Republican nominee in a lot of these races, House and Senate. It's not so much anymore. People look at not only are you pro-life, but do you have a fiscal voting record? We saw that in a lot of those races. We were on the opposite side of a couple of those. I do think that it is going to affect governing in a way that's unprecedented. I believe we're looking at almost gridlock Washington-style politics, because now you have other interest groups out there, not just the House and the Senate trying to control themselves. You have interest groups that played in these races that have an interest in actually what the policy looks like. I do think we're looking at a different legislature, certainly how the policies come out of it.
I think if the Republicans take the majority in both houses, there won't be gridlock. They will pass everything down the line. And because there isn't a Republican that dares depart from the script. There are a handful of, I hate to use the word moderate because that probably overstates the case, but there's some that still aren't totally whacked out, and that in fact at times could be brought into a coalition, like on putting a highway tax on the ballot, for example. I think in a new era with a Republican majority, it'll be binary. It'll be black-white. There'll be no difference. It'll be just down the line, here's how we're voting. And I think the Democrats can just go home.
But if you're looking at an issue like the pending Medicaid crisis, which I believe is a crisis, I think the governor's probably going to put forward a proposal. House and Senate may come together and put forward a proposal. What does that look like? I mean, if you're looking at Republican majorities, obviously Republicans don't want tax increases. I don't like tax increases. How do you solve that problem without revenue? Those are the sorts of ideological positions I think we're looking at.
But we'll be Kansas. I mean, we know what's going to happen. Kansas is the role model, and there's no reason to think we'll be any different. There'll be a massive tax cut, and then there'll be a massive reduction in government services, and the people might be happy with that. And those who are not, because they're harmed by it, well, they're going to have to figure out a way to get out and vote.
At the end of the day, Republicans are looking, how do we shrink government? How do we keep taxes low while at the same time having to balance a budget? That's going to be a tricky line. I think the Republican leadership.
The hardest line is that we still have the Supreme Court that says you have to spend X amount on schools, and that's off the top. And that squeezes everything else.
Yeah, it certainly does. All right, last question here.
Sure.
We got to run in a second here. Political predictions. You guys give me something to walk out of here, keep my eye on going forward.
You go first.
Oh, no. God, I forgot about this.
I'll jump in. I think Republicans have all 4 congressional members. I think Tom Cotton's definitely a winner in the 4th District. And I think they get the House and the Senate, albeit I think it could be close. But in my mind, look at South Arkansas, look at East Arkansas, watch House and Senate races. I think if we as Republicans win there, we'll win majorities easily.
Well, Scott Ellington will give Rick Crawford a race in the 1st, even though he won't have much money, just because Rick Crawford's such a poor candidate. But a couple of the nuts will be beaten. Some of the worst members of the Arkansas legislature, I think, of John Hubbard and Loy Mock, I think some of them might get sent home. And that has nothing to do with Republican or Democrats. That has to do with comedy, and it'll be good. And I don't mean EDY, I mean COMITY.
All right.
And that'd be a good thing.
Max Brantley with the Arkansas Times, Clint Reed with Impact Management Group. Great to have both of you with us.
Appreciate
Thanks.
you.